Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Pedalshift. On this edition, we go all the way back to January 2023 for Pedalshift Project 310 off-season training for bike touring. And as the title connotes, this is all about getting physically ready for an upcoming year of bicycle adventures. And we've got expert opinions from the Adventure Cycling Association, from REI, and some other experts as well, plus a bunch of things that I've done in the past, some successfully and some less successfully. But this is a great episode. I hope you enjoy it. Before we go there, though, we do have a little bit of newsy news, and that is the very first live show of the year will be from Seattle, Washington. The first Seattle show, Seattle Live, will be Friday, January 16th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. I would love for you all to join. We'll make sure that this gets out on the emails. It will also be on the website at pedalshift.net. And of course, you can always go to pedalshift.net/live. You can always go to YouTube as well. It will all live there. Hope to see you on January 16th, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. All right, best of. Now,
on this edition, we are going to be talking about off-season training for bicycle touring. And if you've been with the show for at least a few years, we covered this a little bit from a slightly different angle during one of the beginner series episodes way back in Pedalshift 158. In fact, it's such an old show. We actually did it as a best of, I think, in the last year or two. So in any event, this is something that I get asked an awful lot. Do you have to train? How do I train for a bike tour? And I think that it's probably worth revisiting a few of, at least from my perspective, what the training philosophies are out there for bicycle touring. So the first one is the train like hell. I mean, it is, you have to be doing weightlifting and you have to be conditioned and you may have to basically approach your bike tour like marathon runners approach marathons, with graduation of mileage. And basically you have to be able to be ready to do your mileage from day one, from the jump. That's the train like hell method. There's lots of gyms, there's lots of biking, there's biking before biking, basically. The next one is sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, and this is basically you go from couch to saddle. You ride your way into touring shape. And I know a lot of folks that have done that before, where essentially they are completely 100% out of shape, have not touched their bike at all, and then they hop onto a bike for a multi-day or multi-week or multi-month tour. And after a reasonable period of time, not terribly long, they're basically in bike shape from bicycling 50 to 60 or more miles per day. That gets them into bicycling shape pretty quickly. So that's philosophy number 2. Philosophy number 3 is the one that I have subscribed to for many years, and that is somewhere in the middle. So, that's a bit of a cop-out, I suppose, because that's going to be a shade of gray between these two poles. That's really going to depend on, what shape are you coming into it? How much do you like training and working out and things along those lines? But this is the middle ground between those two poles. And while I would say that I'm somewhere in the middle, I'm probably much more towards the ride your way into touring shape kind of mode, but the reality is it's more like I ride close to year round, but I don't ride a ton of miles. My life when I'm in DC is pretty much all within a few blocks of each other. There's not a lot of multi-mile riding unless I choose to do it specifically. So I'm unlike a lot of folks who use their bicycle as a daily commuter or something along those lines. I don't have quite that. This winter, however, I'm going to try to do a few things in prep for my winter tour. Oh, by the way, sidebar, we've got a preview for my winter tour coming next week, so stay tuned for that. In advance of that, I am looking at creating a off-season training schedule for that particular bike tour, and indeed the early spring tour that's going to be coming not terribly long later as well. And the idea here is that I'm going to do something a little bit more robust than just going, well, I'm kind of riding around the neighborhood a little bit and I'll be fine kind of a thing. I think that, as I talked about in my goal setting up last week, I've got some weight to lose. I want to get into better shape, things along those lines. So as a result, I am creating an off-season training schedule for my bike touring. Now, anytime you're creating some kind of a training regimen, you kind of want to start with a few goals. And yeah, it's a little bit of a more specified version of what I talked about last week, but bear with me here because I think that this will help to give a better sense of what a good training scenario would be like, at least for me. Now, this is going to be for me, not necessarily for you, but I use me as an example just to give you a sense of what might be something you want to think about in advance of your off-season training schedule for your next bike tour. All right, so for me, goal number 1, this is a micro goal of my larger goal. Now, I was looking at losing weight with the longer goal of keeping it off, but I've got a more specific, measurable goal. I want to lose 10 pounds from the beginning of the year, from January 1st. And I'm about 2 weeks and change as I sit here recording this, from that, between that point, starting point, and when my tour begins, which is going to be basically in another 3 weeks and change, give or take. The nice thing is that as of the time I last weighed myself, I'm actually fairly close to that goal already. My stretch goal is to try to drop 12 pounds. So I'm already well on my way to that. Most of that has actually come from just paying attention to diet, as how most weight loss is. The other 2 goals, however, are going to be more about the training schedule, although the training, I think, will also, of course, help impact that first goal of losing 10 pounds. Goal number 2, I want to train a minimum of 30 minutes per day, 3 days per week. And when I say training, I'm talking about being on a bicycle. So it's either going to be indoor on a trainer or an exercise bike, or outdoors on either of the 2 bikes that I've got here in DC available to me. So that's goal number 2. And I think that's a really achievable goal. It's super easy for me to hop on a bike and do it from a trainer perspective or an exercise bike. No problem to be able to do that. I could also be mindful on a beautiful day like this, as I'm sitting here looking outside going, I should be on a bike instead of in front of a microphone. I could go out and do a mindful 30 minutes on a bike. So that's goal number 2. And we want to do that 3 days a week. Goal number 3. Plan and begin upper body and or circuit training. This is the thing that I think is going to be newish to me. I don't spend a lot of time working upper body. I tend to be much more focused on lower body and being on a bike, and I just kind of call it a day from there. I do think that it would behoove me to build up a little bit more in terms of upper body strength. Not necessarily because I need it so much for cycling, but, I think it would just be overall good for conditioning and cross training. So that's my 3rd goal. And you'll notice that that's a little more wishy-washy, that I'm going to be kind of creating a plan and doing some upper body stuff as well. I'm hopefully going to be adding that in on off days. So maybe I'll be going up to 5 days a week of exercise, maybe doing it on 3. The idea here is that I am starting to shift my philosophy a little bit, not necessarily from one pole to the other, but maybe moving it a little bit more within that shade of gray of being somewhere in the middle between train like hell and ride your way into touring shape. I think I'm trying to be a little bit more mindful towards doing actual training. And the reason is that I think it's a lot easier to just jump on the bike when you're younger and fitter. I am not as fit as I would like to be. And, well, I'm not as young as I used to be when I first started out all of this. So I think that I need to be a little bit more into that. The other thing that I didn't mention here as a goal, but something that I want to integrate into all of this is I have got to get more, because I haven't done yoga like in years, quite literally. I've really lost any flexibility that I have. And I think that really matters an awful lot. One of the things that was, I guess, most surprising about plantar fasciitis was the fact how much your calf muscles being tight really impact that. I mean, it's all one system down there. And one of the ways to give yourself relief in that fascia area, if you're having some pain, is you basically stretch out your calf muscle. So that's got me thinking more about limberness, flexibility, things along those lines, how since every muscle and every tendon is all interconnected in some way, shape, or form, that getting flexible, particularly in hamstrings and calves and things like that, will really pay a lot of dividends for me down the line. So that's kind of another thing that I want to integrate into all of this. So I think that I'm going to try to share how this goes over the course of the next month or so. And I'll probably mention it as part of the tour journal as well for the winter one. Again, reminder, we're going to be doing the preview for that first tour of the year. That's going to be coming next week. And so I'll integrate some of these things and let you know, did I hit the mark? Did I was able to do all of this? And to see how it feels. If you recall, if you were with the show last year, I was riding on my trainer at the cabin because that's where we were most of the time last year. And I really noticed a difference for my first tour last year, the fact that I was hopping on the trainer and I was doing some pretty robust, heavy workouts on them. And it's interesting because when I ride on a trainer, I am riding in a completely different way than the way that I would ride on a tour. On a tour, it's a lot more kind of just very casual pedaling. There's very little kind of, real hard, grinded out kind of pedaling. And when I'm on the trainer, there are times when I do that, especially if I'm listening to my music, So different type of cycling, but I do think that it all ends up helping out each other, even though the cycling style is very different. So more to come on all of that, but I do think that it's also worth sharing some of the, shall I say, alternate. There are more training philosophies out there and training programs and training styles than you could shake a stick at. I want to talk about 3 that I found on the internet. And so it must be true, right? If it's on the internet. But the 3 that I've got are linked in the show notes. So go check it out, pedalshift.net/310 if you're interested in checking any of these out. My style may not meet what you want, so I want to make sure that I give some other options, as it were. Biketours.com. I don't necessarily endorse any of these folks. These are just things I found with different philosophies here. Biketours.com had a really, I'm going to throw them a little under the bus here. They were suggesting riding your average daily distance several times per week, well in advance of your tour. What does that mean? So if you're going to be doing a week-long tour and your average distance is going to be 60 miles, which is very typical for me. I'll use me as an example here. Their suggestion is that I should be riding 60 miles a day, several times per week, a few weeks in advance of my tour. And to be honest, I think that's really overkill. Very, very rarely do any kind of riding that is anywhere near the distance that I do on any of my tours. In fact, I don't know too many people that do. So with all due respect to biketours.com, I think that's a bit of overkill. That may be the right philosophy for you, though. If you really want to make sure that it's in your head, you're not sure if you can hit your 60 miles. And you want to make sure that you do it before you're someplace where it's harder to get a rescue or whatever, or, it's really weighing on you. Maybe you want to do something like that. So check them out. That's over at biketours.com. Again, I've got a link in the show notes. Our friends at the Adventure Cycling Association have a different alternate take, and I think that this one is very smart. They say, and I think this is a little bit more about from a beginner's perspective, but bear with it a second here. Focus on time in the saddle first, then seek hills, build endurance, and then most importantly, ride with weight. I think all of those things are super, super smart, but I'm most attracted to, and I would most endorse or co-sign or whatever, focus time in the saddle first. You're not going to be riding very hard for most of the time that you're riding, but you are going to be in the saddle for hours at a time. Sure, you're going to hop off and take breaks, but you're going to be in the saddle for 6 hours, 9 hours, maybe more, depending on the nature of your tour. You really need to be used to being in the saddle. And that's where a lot of folks run into problems. They feel like, I'm in great shape. I could just hop on the bike and boom, no problem. The reality is that the time in the saddle is actually one of the more tricky things to overcome. I'm not just talking saddle sores. I'm talking about the mental grind of it. So I do think that especially if you're reasonably new to bicycle touring or bike packing or whatever you're doing, time in the saddle is something that you want to practice. If you're just doing half-hour rides, excuse me, on an exercise bike, you may be in great shape. You may be in better shape than me or anybody else that's out there. But if you're not mentally prepared for that time in the saddle, that's going to be something that will surprise you very, very quickly. There's a monotony that you need to embrace that's part of bike packing and bike touring. So make sure you know what's going on with all of that. After that, I think that Adventure Cycling Association has it exactly right. Hills. When I was training for my first tour, I was doing mostly hours and hours in the saddle, so I had that right. But I was mostly practicing on the C&O. And as you all know from me talking about it endlessly, there's not really any hills to speak of on the C&O. There's none. And so my first big tour after training with no hills was, I'm going to go out and do California, Northern California, and some of the hilliest parts of that particular trip. So I wasn't really prepared for it. I learned an awful lot about it, but I would say get on seek out, find hills and ride those. I think that's a fantastic next place. And then the usual stuff, build your endurance, but also make sure you practice with your panniers on, with your bike packing bags, however it is you're going to be carrying stuff. Ride with the weight that you're going to be riding. You will find out very quickly that the bike changes when you've got stuff hanging off of it. And then what's fun is if you're ever doing a tour and you're maybe in camp and you want to ride into town or you're going to ride someplace just to accomplish something and you ride unloaded, it's just sort of like, whoa, how different it all is. But from a training perspective, totally endorse everything, co-sign everything Ace says. Go check them out. Get the link in the show notes there as well. And then our friends at REI has... I can't believe I haven't seen this before. They have, again, link in the show notes, sample training week with just fantastic exercise routines. And the thing that I was really most attracted to that REI did was there's a huge focus on flexibility. And that, of course, goes back to what I was talking about before. I think that they tend to be much more closer to the pole of the train like hell philosophy. But there's really some excellent things to consider if you're adopting the somewhere in the middle kind of path that I am as well. So you can go check out all of their routines. They've got, I think they have small weights. They have all sorts of different things that you can take a look at. Lunges. If you really want to make sure that you're doing some kind of an exercise routine and you want to mix that into what you're doing, check out what they've got there. And of course, there's a million different other resources that you can check out over on the interwebs. Those are just 3 that I took a look at, and I think that they are kind of a helpful thing for you as you develop your own plan. And that's the last thing that I want to talk about here. I often talk about you want to make sure that you ride your ride. Well, I think that you want to make sure that you are creating a training scenario that fits who you are and what you're trying to accomplish. And that's going to change over time. I have been more laissez-faire about training. Now I think I'm going to, because of the success last year, try to do more of a winter-based training regimen ahead of my first tours. And indeed, I think I'm going to be continuing it, not just to that tour, but in between that tour and the early spring tour that I've got going as well. Just to do a variety of things. Make the ride more comfortable, make the ride better, but also, to prevent injury. I've been really quite lucky, to be honest. I've done a lot of miles and a lot of riding for touring, and I've never really had too much in the way of injury. I tweak my knees here and there, you'll get kind of the regular aches and pains, but I've never really had a real big injury. And I think one of the things that you can do to help ensure that is to make sure that you're not going in completely cold. And I know I said that was last but not least, but now is last but not least. One other element to all of this, I think, and this goes hand in hand with the flexibility discussion that I've had before is making sure you're not just hopping onto the bike cold when you're riding anytime. Doing some stretching, doing some yoga. I think that would be a really smart way to do, not only to just get your muscles and your tendons and everything warmed up and ready to go, but it could be a good injury preventer as well. And of course, we did an entire episode with my partner, Kimberly, all about yoga for bicycle touring. You can check that out at episode 073 of the show, going all the way back to, well, actually it goes, we did a best of it back in March of 2020, but yeah, 073 is many years ago. I think 2017, if memory serves. So go check that out as well. All right. Well, so I'd be really curious what you do for your, feel free to share that. Shoot me an email, give me a call on the voicemail hotline, send me a text, whatever it is. And if you've got ideas for training in the off season, we'd love to share that with the rest of the community. And we can do that on a future episode.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.